society and what it feels like to live in this country. And I think we're going through those earthquakes. Not just Trump and everything he represents, but the rise in political violence, the collapse in trust in our society. All of these things, I think, are related to that. And we're running out of time to do something about it.
Trump made a lot of promises when he came into power.
Mm-hmm.
He won in a bigger than expected victory, I would say. Why does he resonate?
Well, first of all, I think he speaks to a lot of people who know that the system has let them down. And even though I think he's somebody who really benefits from the system as it is, it's made him rich and kept him rich. You know, his message was, I'm going to blow it all up. And I think he's blowing up all the wrong things. But look, if the system's let you down, you're only going to vote so many times within that system before somebody comes along and says, I'm going to blow it all up. And you say, well, I might not even like the guy, but I'll give him a shot to see if that makes me better off. Now, I also think he lied to a lot of people. Some people voted for him because they believed him when he said he's not going to start a new war. Many people voted for him because they believed him when he said on day one he was going to start lowering costs. And right now, inflation's higher than it was the day he took over. So these promises weren't true, but they spoke to something that I think a lot of people had on their mind that made a lot of people willing to burn things down. And there's a lesson for my party in that. I'm obviously passionately against many destructive things that he's doing. That doesn't mean the answer is to, quote unquote, reverse the damage, put everything back the way it was.
Mm-hmm. Because you're right that the Democrats have a lot of responsibility here for a lot of reasons. I think the very fact that Trump was voted into power says something about how people felt with the previous administration, which was a Democratic administration. What responsibility does the Democratic Party have for getting the country to a place where they thought Democrats weren't the solution? Because that's kind of, I think a lot of people thought that's just like more of the same.
Yeah.
Maybe people are getting increasingly, I think across the Western world by the looks of it, increasingly tired with like politicians saying these like cute words and like, we're going to help the working people and blah, 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 and being very polished. And then you see these other figures that have come in and said, I'm not a politician.
Yeah.
And as you say, I'm going to burn it down.
Right.
And for some reason, people are choosing that.
Yeah. Even though when they do, usually that person makes it worse. And so that's why the president's unpopular. But the president is unpopular, to your point. That doesn't mean people are automatically going to trust Democrats.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, the answer to your question is yes, Democrats have a responsibility to present something that is better, not just better than now, but it's got to be better than before. The fact remains, a lot of these results have unfolded on, kind of regardless of who's in power.
Are you going to run to be president in 2028?
I don't know. I would have to believe, and this is how I've approached every time I've decided to run for office. It's looking at everything that the office seems like it needs, not just generally, but in that moment. And then looking at what I bring to the table and asking myself, okay, am I bringing something that's different enough from what others are bringing and that fits like that moment? Like that's what led me to run for mayor, which is a pretty unlikely move in South Bend, Indiana, when I was in my 20s. It's what led me to run for president when I did, almost 8 years ago now.
I'll use your own words here, Secretary. Politics often favors someone who is completely different to the current leader, and that you could not be more different from Trump. I quote, an intellectual, young, gay mayor from the Midwest. Amazon have this really interesting thing when they hire people, which we copied. Every time you meet someone, you have to vote one of four things. You either vote strongly not inclined, inclined, and strongly inclined. So you've got four options when you interview someone. We do the same in our company now, we took it from them. And the whole idea here is to prevent people from sitting on the fence, which is like, what is your inclination? So if I presented you with those four options as it relates to you running for president in 2028, as things stand, and this is just a balance of probability, are you inclined, not inclined, strongly not inclined, strongly inclined? On these podcasts, nobody ever tells the bloody truth. This is why it's difficult sometimes to interview politicians, because we all have an inclination, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why you hesitate to talk in those terms is because like people are going to use the day thing, and kind of dominate the next couple of days when you're trying to talk about something else. But
does the truth just not matter more though than the consequence of the truth in this regard?
yeah, but the truth about like what I'm maybe gonna do, like there's a level of like not even being certain things I'll have to weigh, like before having made a decision like this before. I can tell you that there's the
I need the inclination.
Like I'm obviously not to one end or the other.
Yeah, okay, so you're not those two.
I think I'm like more inclined than not.
Okay, I appreciate it.
But there's so much we don't know. There's so much I don't even know about what's going to happen this year, let alone what we need to know later. And this is not, the weight of a decision like that. I don't just mean like the national political weight, but just like the weight of a decision to run for office for you and your family, which frankly I did not fully understand until I had kids. That's changed all of my equations. It's just something that you really sit with and take seriously. At least you should.
One of the big things that people are talking about at this moment in time is the Iran war.
Yeah.
And this feeds into some of the points we were touching on around promises kept and not kept. What is going on in plain terms? Because Americans are getting lots of messages. We've destroyed everything in Iran, the military bases are all gone, and then we're back at war and American lives have been taken. Can you help us see through all of this?
I think what's going on is the president has painted himself and the country into the corner. There was a moment where it seemed to him that he was better off politically if we were at war. Even though he promised that we wouldn't be, even though a lot of his supporters didn't want the war, and certainly the American people as a whole don't want it. But he was under a lot of heat over cost of living, over the Epstein files, which was dominating the conversation every day, being proven to be as connected to an infamous pedophile as Jeffrey Epstein, and then doing everything he could to cover up disclosures about it, right? This is something that obviously was something that was creating a ton of heat on the president. Meanwhile, there's a lot of people in his ear every day.
Einstein of Wall Street, Peter Tuckman.
I trade between $500 million and $1 billion a day.
Do you think the average investor can beat the S&P 500?
So if you were to buy $250 into the S&P 500 every month from the age of 18, you would have $1.4 million by the time you were 60. But I believe if you follow the rules, you could probably beat the S&P.
Did you meet Jordan Belfort?
Of course. He came down to the New York Stock Exchange and he tried to recruit brokers to... They were all taken off the floor by the FBI in handcuffs.
Have you seen greed ruin a lot of people's lives?
Absolutely. I've seen them go broke over it. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's not for people who just want to find the easy way out. That's not the way to do this. I got COVID March 15, 2020. Patient zero. Got the worst strain that was out there. I was given 3 months to live. I lost a big part of my left lung.
Peter, with the life and career that you've built, how do you want to be remembered?
So I think that I always get emotional about it. I want to be remembered as somebody who...
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the School of Hard Knocks podcast. I'm James. I'm here with Jack and Josh, and we have an incredible guest for you all right now. My good friend, Peter Tuckman, otherwise known as the Einstein of Wall Street. He is the longest ever standing trader on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the most famous stockbroker in the world.
Yes.
Peter, thank you for being with us.
I am honored to be with the three of you.
It seems like
Thank
every
you.
time I'm in New York, I have to see you.
We have to be together. That's it.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
I want to get right into it. I want to get started.
Let's go.
You've been on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange for now 4 decades.
Correct.
You've been through some of the most insane financial booms, financial crashes. I want you to take us back to the most chaotic day on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. What happened?
Okay. So I started on March 28th, 1985. And it wasn't until recently they put up a photograph at the stock exchange that was in fact the day that I was 25 years old. I had just come back. I'd been living in Africa, and I got a summer. My parents said, "You know what? It's time for you to put on your big boy pants and let's get down to business." And I had a much older brother who was a pretty big takeover guy on Wall Street back in the day, and so they got me a summer job. I come back from Africa on the 23rd of March. And I'd been there for 1.5 years, and I just sort of walked into this job. It was a summer internship. Turned out it was the day that Ronald Reagan rang the opening bell. I was 25. I was overwhelmed by back then it was open outcry. There was 7,000 people in that room that you've been in a couple of times. And So I was fortunate enough after the summer to move I loved it. I loved it the minute I walked on the floor, the chaos, the adrenaline. That's my sweet spot, right? Some people would go, oh my God, I need to, have a cigarette and a newspaper and a coffee to get going. That's not me. I'm thoroughbred out of the gate. And so I was able to move my way up. And by the time the crash of 1987 happened, everyone needs to know that all the crashes that we've seen, and I don't use that word lightly, we've had a handful of them in history. 1929, there was probably one during World War II. There was a crash of 87. There was the internet bubble. There was the financial crisis 07, 08, 08, 09, and then obviously COVID, and then last year's the tariff sell-off that we had, 20%, and then I would say we had maybe a couple of mini ones. We just came out of one around the war with Iran. So I would say each one of these crashes, didn't happen in a day, although the crash of 87 did. And each one of the crashes, pullback, they're crashes, and then they're pullbacks, sell-offs, consolidations. So the components that made up each one of these things, which were major, the only thing that is similar about all of them was that before they happened, the market was trading at record highs before it happened. A crash did not happen when the market had sort of been eroding. It happened when it was at the high. You can really literally go back to February 19th of last year, in 2025, when Donald Trump decided to start talking about tariffs, was the high of the market. February 12th, COVID, when the market started to unravel around COVID, and obviously that where we really sold off, probably 14, 15,000 points on the Dow. February 12th, record high. The day before the crash of 87, also a record high. But each one of these crashes had a different component that made it happen, right? Obviously, COVID was a global health crisis. 07, 08 was a predatory lending crisis. 87 was a little bit different, and I've still not been able to get to understand what really was going on. But it was open outcry, it was paper things. There was no technology at that time, right? We were all paper, all screaming and yelling like you've seen in the movies. And I was a clerk at the time, right? So I stood in front of a battery of telephones. Back in the day, you would have these black regular receiver phones, and you'd have those little buttons you would push. And I had over 100 telephone lines, and then we had these machines called dot machines, which were sort of spitting out. This was the most technology there was at the time. Would be spitting out these small retail orders: buy 500, sell 500. And we came into work that day, and there was sort of a lot of anxiety around the day before, but it was Black Monday, right? Percentage-wise, it was the biggest sell-off I think we've ever seen, because back then market was not, we're now at 50,000. So sell-offs are different percentages versus how they were. I think the Dow was, in the 80s, Dow was at 3,000. I think the Dow was at 6,000 at the time. And we sold off 608 points. And so percentage-wise, it was the biggest. I think it had to do a lot with, there was some insurance stuff going on, a little bit of incoming technology, but my memory of it was, as a clerk, was sort of desperation. I mean, the machine was spitting out orders like you couldn't even. I would imagine it's probably like in a restaurant, if you've seen like the show The Bear, when things get chaotic and their orders are coming in from to the kitchen and whatnot. Orders were just spitting out, and I was just tearing and ripping and tearing and ripping. I had these what we call $2 brokers. They were independent brokers who were just lining up. I would hand them stacks of orders, and they would just go out into the crowd, and basically by the time the market started to just implode, like a way to give you an understanding of how much of a sell-off it was. It was a company back then, it was one of the first computer companies, it was called Digital Equipment, DEC. And the stock opened at 168, it closed at 40. Just to give you a sense of the value lost, obviously. Now you see stocks go up and down, millions and billions of dollars in a day. That back then, if there was a 3 or 4 point move in the Dow, it was a big day. So to think that we sold off 608 points was quite devastating. So there was definite mayhem, there was definite chaos. The bottom line is, though, you're in the heat of battle, right? And so as a clerk, being on the front lines of it, it's not like I already had a sense that when something like this happened, I could not crumble, I could not waver, I could not freak out, right? You needed to, it's like, and I'm not comparing myself to a soldier at war, but you're in the front lines, and there's money involved, right? And and if I make an error, it's gonna come out of my hide, and it's gonna be costly. And so I had to navigate the room and navigate the order flow coming in and navigate the brokers I was giving it to, and all I remember was just a look of absolute horror on everybody's face, and when stress, obviously, too. And so but it's funny, some people can handle that, some people cannot. I kind of rise to the occasion. That was one of my first introductions to where it's like, okay, this is sink or swim. That was where I really cut my teeth. And I would have to say it was, by the end of that day, if you kind of think of that Trading Places movie day, where at the end of it, it's like everybody throws their paper on the floor, and it's like, now is the time to, margin call, Mr. Duke, type of a moment. Hysteria, chaos, mayhem. However, I knew that I had every dot, dotted and every T crossed. And so that at the end of the day, I probably collapsed to the floor, but I knew I had done a good job.
Peter, this is maybe an interesting question, but I feel like when you look at the course of finance, in particular New York City, Wall Street, right? One of the most competitive districts for finance, right? It's the financial capital in the entire world. In the times that I've met you and anybody that I feel like has met you, you have this, I want to call it like a delusional optimism about you, which I think is one of your superpowers, beyond just the tactical trading side of things. But when you think about in finance, all the highs and lows that come, I mean, I'll put it blank. There's people that jump out of buildings because of
100%, because of money.
100%.
Yes.
How have you maintained such a level-headedness throughout your 4 decades being in finance and still being just a very optimistic and happy person? Because I've met a lot of successful people, financial traders, and you can tell that deep down they are miserable. How have you kind of maintained your happiness and your peace of mind despite all that's gone on and all that you've witnessed?
So, I love the question because it's I've never really thought of it before that way, but I think the real answer to the question is that I never, up until recently, I never owned a share of stock in my life. Now, people would go like, what are you kidding me? That makes no sense. You're a stockbroker. Of course, you bought and sold stock for yourself. You had a 401k or whatever. Literally, you have to realize that as a broker, I got my first seat on the stock exchange April 17th, 1988. So I'd been there about 3.5 years. It used to take usually between 13 and 15 years to get a seat. I got lucky. One guy retired, one guy got fired, one guy quit. And I just got moved up. I was in the right place at the right time. And I was told at that time that as a broker, you have certain regulations, and you're not allowed to own a stock within a 30-day period for yourself and a customer, right? So because obviously there's a conflict of interest. Like if I'm in a stock for myself or the customer, I know that I have 1 million shares to buy for one of my customers, and I go out and buy the stock for myself. Well, that's called front running. That's Jordan Belfort. That's what Jordan Belfort did. When Jordan Belfort came down to the floor and recruited 8 brokers to be his sort of lackeys, he came up to all of us and he said, "I'll pay you $1 million when you get a big order, right? When you get a big 1 million share order, you buy the first 5,000 for me, and then when you're done buying it, you sell the last 5,000 for me." That's called front running.
Did you meet Jordan Belfort?
Of course. He came down to the New York Stock Exchange and he tried to recruit brokers to do his bidding, which was front run the stock market, because there were house brokers, there were $2 brokers, and then there were people who had good it was all about relationships. There were people who had really good relationships, and they stood in one stock. They had a great feeling for the stock. The stocks are funny that way. If you trade a stock all the time, you've got a feeling for it. So there were market makers who ran the stock. IBM was a guy named Brian Yunker, amazing guy. He knew there may have been 100 people in his crowd. He knew what everybody had. That was his secret sauce. And then there would be one guy who stood in the crowd. One guy stood in Philip Morris. He just knew how to trade Philip Morris. So if any of us had an order in it, we'd give it to him to protect us, because he had all the orders in his hands. So Jordan Belfort came down to the floor. He found the people who were those people who stood in one stock, and he went up to them and said, "So you get 1 million share orders in a stock?" And they said yes. He said, "Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to But when you get an order to buy 1 million shares, you call me up and I want you to buy the first 5,000 from me. And then as you buy the 1 million shares, by the time you're on the end of it, it's probably up a few, $2 or $3. You sell my last 5,000. That is classic, called front running. It's buying stock with the knowledge of a buy order, right? It's as illegal as you can get. And about 8 brokers on the floor took him up on the deal. He offered $1 million, and they were all taken off the floor by the FBI in handcuffs with the with the jackets on, and most of them spent more time in prison than he did. But let's move away from that. You asked me how I was able to navigate all of that, and so honestly, up until recently, my wife passed away a couple of years ago, and she left some money, and so I figured out a way that I could open up a retirement account and have no control of it or no contact with it, and so that I wouldn't, because I built a trading strategy in probably 26, 27 years ago, trading the S&P 500. So I'm actually in every one of the 347 stocks in the S&P every day. So literally I couldn't, and what other stocks, I could probably pick a couple of outlier stocks to invest in, but legally I couldn't actually buy any of those names and be in them for a customer.
And for context, how much stock are you trading a day?
So the best way to describe it is, it's hard to know how many shares, but I know the dollar amount because on my handheld computer that routes the orders out, I get to see what my credit limits are, which is how much am I allowed to, my machine it has sort of guidelines. Like, I don't want it, because we make mistakes, there are errors, there are things like that. So we'll put a credit limit, which is the total amount of money that my machine will let me accept, so that somebody doesn't send an erroneous billion share order or something. My machine will flag it and say, oh, that must be a mistake, right? You're over your limit. And so I trade usually between $500 million and $1 billion a day in stock and in the S&P and in the S&P 500 with my son. My son is my partner. We're the last father and son team on the floor. When I got down on Wall Street in '85, there were 70 market makers, and almost all of them were family-owned businesses, right? There were fathers, uncles, brothers, and there was the Henderson brothers, there were the Cohen brothers, there were Irish, Italians, and Jews. Came down to Wall Street in the early part of the century. They had a little money. They came down. They were allocated one stock. They traded it. They did well. They were given another stock, and then they grew. And that's kind of how it happened. But without having skin in the game, without me worrying about my own portfolio, like if I'm in a crash, and I know that my retirement fund just went from being worth $100,000 to being $5,000, I would be stressed over it no matter what. Money's just that way. But if my sole purpose of being there in the day is taking care of my customer, right? Then that's where my focus is. Then I don't need to be stressed. I'm just doing the right thing by him. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm the executor guy, right? I'm the guy who's doing it. So all I need to do is be hyper-focused on doing the right thing for him. And so at the end of the day, whether the market goes up or down, I don't care.